afternoon and welcome to CEC Gurukul lecture. In continuation with the series on economic sociology, in today's lecture we are going to discuss on how globalization as a process has led to the strengthening of inequality. Inequality not only at a level of individual or community or nation state but at a global level. Therefore, the title of the lecture is Global Inequality and Globalization. Now, global inequality is inequality between all citizens of the world. It treats the world as a single unit as we normally treat individual country. So, there are different levels at which inequality as a phenomena can be understood. One is to say at a level of individual, whether individual man A is unequal to say women, and at a level of community where we say one community is placed unequal with comparison to another. Then the third level is at the level of a nation. Two nations are compared on a basis which is where they are unequal or equal in the international scenario. And the other is with the process of globalization to look into the entire globe as one community and then try to understand how individuals or citizens of different nations, different countries are placed at different position because of this larger phenomena of global inequality. So, basically in short, global inequality is a key way to understand how economies rise and fall or how societies change. So, we go by the assumption that the entire transformation or social change in a society can take place when the economy is changing. So, the economy it leads to a competition between nations, between countries, and that kind of changes the position of citizens in the global scenario. We are here going to refer to a particular reading, and this is a book titled Global Inequality, a New Approach for the Age of Globalization, and the author is Branko Milanovic. Now, the author is trying to understand the relationship between global inequality and globalization by raising certain important questions. Number one, how global inequality has changed in the past 25 years, and that is one of the major phenomena which kind of helps us to understand global inequality is how the global middle class has emerged, and these middle class are now kind of holding the top 1% of the economic positions. The second question is, what determines the long term evolution of within nation inequality? And for this, the author refers to the concept of Kuznets waves. We will discuss what is Kuznets hypothesis and what he means by Kuznets wave. But this he is trying to understand, doing a comparison of different nations and understand inequality cycles in individual countries over the past several centuries. The third question is how income gaps among nations has evolved over the past 2 centuries, global inequality of opportunity and migration. The fourth question is how global inequality will evolve in the 21st century in light of Kuznets waves and economic convergence, plutocracy and populism. So, through these important concepts, the convergence theory, the plutocracy and populism, the author arrives at a theoretical understanding of the increase in global inequality with the increase in the rate of globalization. Now, when we try to understand global inequality, the first concepts that becomes very relevant is to understand the concept of income inequality and political issue, because keep in mind that we are looking into a phenomena at a international level, means that we are kind of cutting across the national identity. So, how is income inequality and political issues connected? So, here the author in this book explores these topics from a global perspective. And what do we mean by a global perspective? It means that we examine the issues of plutocracy, issue of populism and how these issues affect different countries around the world. So, throughout the book, both income inequality and political issues are related to inequality, and both have been examined at a global perspective. Now, we know in mind that the world is not divided under a single government. Obviously, every nation state has its own government, and there is no common authority or common government for the entire globe. However, we cannot dispense with the need to look at individual nation states. So, while we are looking at a larger globe, we need to keep in mind the nation's state, or how each nation responds to the economic crisis and political issues. So, the analysis is both at the level of nation state as well as how the inequality is reflected at a global level. On the contrary, many global issues are played out politically at the level of nation state. The world does not have a single government, so each country or nation state manages its own political issues. This means global problems are often dealt with at the national level. So, we know that there was a crisis which was a global phenomena like the COVID crisis, but each government, rather each nation state, evolved its own policies or programs to tackle the problem emerging, because it was a health crisis, it was a worldwide phenomena. Every nation was impacted by it, but there was no kind of a common method to deal with it. It was being dealt at an individual national level. Globalization, or the increasing connection between countries through trade, impacts people differently in different countries. So, we know that the world has become like a globe, but how this process impacts the economy, political condition and social condition at the nation state will depend on how the government is responding to the crisis or to the process, and how the citizens are also kind of impacted by the global phenomena. So, the example here that the author discusses is that workers in China may demand rights for free trade union, while workers in the United States may want protective measures for their job. So, the problem is the same, the working conditions of the workers in a, say, a global setup, but each nation has its own problem, and also the response to the problem or to the crisis is dependent on how the nation state takes it up. So, we need to keep both in mind, that there is a understanding or analysis of an economic crisis at a national level, but at the same time there are certain convergence, there are certain commonality among nations in the way in which it becomes an say kind of a global problem. So, the commercial exchange between countries, that is the exchange of goods and services, just not affects the trade, but also has political consequences within country and not just at a global level. Thus, the economy of nations, job prospects and even people's access to education and information are all impacted by globalization. So, we know that globalization is a kind of a big process, or it has impacted the globe, and it has kind of brought about a large scale transformation. How do we understand that, what are the changes that globalization has kind of done for the world economy? So, first we kind of understand that globalization as a process establishes new guidelines for international relations, such as reducing carbon emission or stopping cross-border tax evasion, or kind of having more kind of a global peace, decline in the terrorism and violence. So, these are certain phenomena which has impacted all the nations, and therefore, they can be a common approach to deal with these problems. According to the author, we should now consider economic disparity on a worldwide scale rather than merely concentrating on it within a single nation. The idea is that since there are certain ways in which the common problems are tackled commonly, so even poverty or in terms of income disparity, inequality is now a global phenomena, and therefore it should be tackled at a global level. Now, he is saying that there are three key factors. It is human nature to be curious about the lifestyle and economic status of those living in different regions of the world. This can teach us new skills that will help us better our own life, such as how to negotiate a raise at work, that is, increase the wage or the payment for the work that is being compensated, or make wiser judgments about where to go. So, if we have common solution to a common problem, then it can be a lesson for those who want to kind of learn from it. It will impact certain skills to tackle certain problems which are known to others, and that is why it has to be a collective response. The problem is collective, therefore, the solution has to come in from a collective setup. Over the last 10 years, improved data on global income distributions have allowed us to compare income inequality across national boundaries. So, earlier it could have been difficult to kind of have a analysis at a global level now, but because of telecommunication, because of internet, the availability of data, it is possible to generate income inequality at a national level and then compare the nations in terms of the level of inequality. Now, examining global inequality enables to understand the world has evolved over the past 200 years. So, when we have the income inequality data at a national level and we kind of have a temporal study, that is, we kind of compare it, how much has there been an improvement or has there been a decline. So, we get a clear cut idea of how the globe is evolving or how the globe is changing. The data illustrates changes in relative and actual economic power of nations, particularly within the last 25 years. For instance, Europe and North America gained influence with the Industrial Revolution, while Asian nations have recently experienced fast economic growth. 1988 is significant because it happened immediately following the fall of the Berlin Wall and the start of communist economy like China entering the world economy. So, how are we arriving at such a statement, or how are we able to understand that the West was progressing with the Industrial Revolution, Asian countries comes in a big leap in the 1990s onward. So, these data are available for analysis and there is a necessity to have a cross nation comparison of data on income inequality. So, the rise of global middle class and especially in the Asian countries like China, the need to understand the income inequality or differences in the income inequality in the last 25 becomes important. So, the rich countries which are mainly kind of considered as countries in the West have a growing group of people who are rich globally, but may still be considered middle or lower class in their own country. So, this again is a comparison of the income of a country with the other countries, and when you see it within the country, there are certain groups which would fall into the richer class, but when you compare it with some other countries, this same group falls into the middle level, and therefore, the idea that the middle class is kind of becoming larger in number. It has kind of become, the middle class has become ambiguous as a category. So, what we need to do is try to understand global inequality as difference in income between individual living in various countries and within the same country. It entails comparing the income disparities between affluent and poor individual inside a nation, such as rich and poor Americans or rich and poor Indians. Or, so, it is this comparison in taking place within the citizen of a nation. Then the second way we step is to compare these rich class with the richer class of the other country and see where there is an income disparity. So, very simply put, this understanding of global inequality is basically a way to understand the income gap between people in different country and also within the country. Now, we will kind of try to understand the Kuznets hypothesis, which has been used by the author to explain what he means by global inequality. Now, the author uses long-term historical data on income inequality going back in some cases to the Middle Ages to reformulate the Kuznets hypothesis, the workhorse of inequality economic. Now, what is this Kuznets hypothesis? This hypothesis was formulated by Nobel Prize winning economist Simon Kuznets, and therefore, it goes by his name as Kuznets hypothesis. This hypothesis was constructed in the 1950s, and it states that as countries industrialize and average income grow, inequality will at first increase and then decrease, resulted in an inverted U-shaped curve when one plotting off the income against the inequality. And it says as countries industrialize, first the income will increase and after a period of time it will decline. So, there will be a inverted U-shaped formed. The Kuznets hypothesis has recently been found wanting because of its inability to explain a new phenomena in the United States and other rich country, and that is income inequality, which had been decreasing through much of the 20th century, has recently been on an upswing. So, therefore, the hypothesis, the Kuznets hypothesis is now being questioned, because what has been seen in the richer countries, especially in the United States, is that the income rather than declining is going on further increasing. So, this is difficult to reconcile with the Kuznets hypothesis as originally defined, and the original definition was the increase of inequality in the rich world should not have happened. That is that richer countries are becoming more rich and the poor are kind of continuing to be at where they are. So, we apply Kuznets hypothesis, those in the rich in the richer countries should have become poor, that is the income should have declined, but this has not happened. In order to provide a more comprehensive explanation for both the contemporary increase in inequality and its historical evolution, the author presents the concept of Kuznets waves or cycles. These cycles can be used to forecast future trends in inequality, not only in wealthy nations, but also in nations like Brazil and China. The author traces the first Kuznets wave over the century and a half ending in the 1980s, when the second wave began, jump-started by many of the same factors as first technology, globalization, pro-rich economic policy. So, basically he is kind of categorizing the process of the increase and decline in income into categories. In the first wave it is increasing, and then in the second wave it is kind of rather than declining further increases because of other factors. So, along with the economy changing, there was a kind of more and more political policies, certain global changes that was taking place, and this has impacted the level of understanding of inequality at the global level. Now, the author is kind of also explaining the types of forces affecting inequality and says that there are two types of forces. One is malign forces. Malign are detrimental, which are kind of negative forces. These forces are like wars, natural disaster and disease, which tends to increase inequality. And the second force is benign. The benign means positive, they are going to boost the economic transformation. So, the positive forces are better education, social programs, fairer tax. So, these kind of productive policies and programs taking place at a nation level that will kind of reduce inequality in the particular nation. So, probably in the western countries which had kind of already good economic condition, it was possible for the benign forces to act on more, and therefore, it created a conducive environment for economic to further have a growth. So, in short, the author uses the Kuznets waves to explain the ups and downs of inequality over time and across different countries. For most of modern history, global inequality has been shaped by vast income differences between countries. The Industrial Revolution dramatically widened the gap, making wealth in the West far greater than in the much of the world. And this was in contrary to a lot of thinkers or scholars who were under the impression that with the process of industrialization and globalization, there would be a convergence and it could be more egalitarian. Just the reverse happened. Rather than reducing the gaps between the rich and the poor, it widened the gap, not only within the nation, but also between nations. However, today we are witnessing a significant shift as Asian countries, particularly China and India, experienced rapid economic growth. The income gap between countries are narrowing. This change signals a possible future where global inequality is more about the differences between countries rather than between them. So, as we kind of look into the comparison of countries for understanding inequality, we see there is an income convergence, and as countries across Asia and other regions continue to grow economically, global inequality is no longer solely defined by the wealth of nation. Instead, we see a return to a world similar to that of the early 19th century, where inequality within individual countries took center stage. In such a world, the rich and the poor within nations like Britain, Russia and China were more dramatically divided than the nations themselves. And if the current trend of economic convergence continue, inequality between countries will continue to decrease, but disparities within nations will become more pronounced. And another issue that is again a kind of a global problem is the migration issue, and that is that the income and overall life process of individual depends on the place of the birth, and the author refers to it as citizenship rent, that being born in a wealthy country provides you economic conditions, better technology and other conditions that helps in the increase in income pressure. So, as a result, many people are driven to migrate to a country where infrastructure, resources, economy is more, and that is more in the wealthier. So, there is a pull of the human resource to the richer country, which helps in improving the economic status of that country. And therefore, the key drivers in inequality are kind of income convergence, unexpected global shift and global inequalities. So, these are some of the ways in which the author is kind of making an effort to understand how globalization as a process has widened the income disparity between nations and has kind of helped need to understand global inequality as a more complex and integral problems of the world today. With this, I come to an end of this lecture. Thank you.